You're listening to Brave Girls with Tracy M., where we choose to empower you to be a better leader, mentor, and coach in the world. We'll share stories of people who have achieved great heights by overcoming adversity and rising to the challenge, all while pursuing their passions. These courageous people will inspire you to have faith in yourself and take bold action. Right here with the host of Brave Girls, Tracy M.
Episode 1, Dare to be Deliberate with Angee, Linsey. Originally a journalist in both the Army and the Navy, Angee Linsey has worked as a communications professional for both corporations and PR agencies. Her podcast, Listen In with Angee Linsey, can be found on iTunes, and she profiles communications leaders around the country and how they've risen through the ranks. Angee's based in Seattle, where she leads a boutique executive search firm that focuses on marketing and communications job opportunities. She's been in business for herself for over a decade and loves being an entrepreneur. She has a master's degree in career development and has years of recruiting experience, including working for Starbucks. She loves being a matchmaker for her clients and the candidates. She's recently launched a series of workshops called Dare to be Deliberate, and her new book will soon be released. In this episode, Angee shares her story with me, including working as a writer and editor on a cruise ship, and some of her best career advice for today's workplace. I think work is like a jungle gym, and so it's important to be deliberate with your choices. You want to be clear about where you've been and how you can help an organization as you're looking to change jobs or perhaps move up in the organization. I hope you'll enjoy our chat. And so here's episode 1, Dare to be Deliberate with Angee Linsey.
So tonight I'll be talking to Angee Linsey from the West Coast out in Seattle. So West Coast meets East Coast. And I'm really excited to let everybody hear about her journey as a brave girl and give us a little bit of background about how she and I came to meet and what both of us are passionate about. And so, Angee, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited that we're here. I'm excited that we got reconnected. So I guess the way we met is kind of fortuitous. We're both marketing and communications professionals, and we're both really passionate about career planning. And I think we met out in San Francisco a couple years ago at a conference and just happened to be chit-chatting. And I was thinking about writing a book, and that book is now out, Brave Girl's Guide to Work That You Love. And came across an email. I got on your email list, and you had written that you had started a podcast, and that triggered me that I never sent you the final product. And so I was happy to be a guest on your podcast, Listen In with Angee Linsey, a few weeks ago. And I am so excited to now be starting my podcast journey. So
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's a journey, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Really is. So why don't you just tell our listeners a little bit about your journey and kind of your backstory? I know I'm always interested in knowing what people's backstory is and kind of a little bit about them. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, have you always been in Seattle? Have you always been on the West Coast?
Well, let me start kind of present tense, and then I'll go backwards a little bit. So right now, I am based in Seattle. I lead a boutique executive search firm that specializes in marketing and communications recruitment. I also do career coaching for individuals, and I do some group stuff through workshops and presentations. I did not originate from Seattle. I've only been here about 10 years, but I love it. The Pacific Northwest is a beautiful place to be.
Lots of Starbucks, right? Lots of Starbucks.
Oh, yes. Lots of coffee shops of all types.
I'm sure. So, and your recruiting aspect of your business, it's national, correct?
Mm-hmm. We do national search. And the reason that I actually created my business with this niche in mind is because, as you mentioned earlier, I'm a former communications leader myself.
Right. And so where was your experience in communications or public relations? Who did you do work for?
So I have kind of two tiers of experience that ran parallel to each other. I actually started my life as a journalist in the Army. I enlisted right out of high school because I wasn't ready to go to college, and I grew up in Iowa, and I really wanted out of Iowa. So I joined the Army as a journalist and went to Germany and Kansas for assignments, and that was great. To Missouri. Right out of school, I got recruited and worked for the Dow Chemical Company. I also did work for Fleischmann Hillard and for a cruise line where I was a writer. So lots of things on the communication side. Simultaneously, I actually stayed in the reserves as an enlisted journalist until I applied to get my commission in the Navy Reserves, and I became a public affairs officer and stayed a public affairs officer all the way through retirement. So I served 25 years in the military total.
Wow. Well, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. I really appreciate that. And I know our listeners will too. And so who do you root for? Do you root for Army or do you root for Navy?
I got to confess, I root for Navy.
All right. All right. Go Navy. Go Navy. I know that there's quite the rivalry there. And so in those experiences as a journalist for the military, I'm assuming you were embedded in different areas, and you were a writer and you were covering different things from both an internal and external perspective, communications-wise.
Really, the work was really focused internally when I was an Army journalist, because I'm old enough to say it was before our war tempo was at what it is today and has been for 15 years. But we did a lot of base publications, a lot of communicating to the family members and the military members.
Right, right. What a great experience to just get that training and that military discipline and regimen, and, you know, and to be a woman, right? Back then, 25 years ago, and kind of come up through the ranks. That's amazing. That's amazing.
I definitely got exposure to things that most young women do not get exposed to, in a good way.
Good. Yeah. And so something that why I wanted to talk to you today is, I know that you are also part of your business as well is the career coaching. And I know that we're both really super passionate about being intentional with the moves that we make as we kind of manage our work life and everything. And so could you just tell me a little bit about maybe, what did it take to really just quit all of that and then say, I'm going to start this company and I'm going to do these things?
Well, it was a long time when I decided that I was going to put public relations to the side and change careers. I went back to graduate school and got my master's degree in career development. And that's when I became a recruiter as well. So those parts of my life have been moving along really successfully. I recruited both in an agency and inside corporations. And that's how I ended up in Seattle. I was actually recruited by Starbucks to come and work in recruiting operations. And it was a really interesting time because on paper, the job was fantastic. The company, of course, is fantastic. I'm a proud gold card carrying Starbucks customer. But from my own strengths standpoint and the way that the job was set up, it was a total mismatch. And I ended up realizing as a front of the house person, I was doing a back of the house job. And one crazy day, I just decided I was going to quit my perfectly good job with health insurance and start my search firm. I had several things that built up to it that just made it so clear that it was the right thing for me to do that I just made the leap and it worked out. I gave myself a 1-year deadline that if I I could live for 1 year if I had no new clients. But luckily I didn't have to worry about it after the first year.
Right. Well, that just takes so much courage to just be in something that you could completely have stayed in forever, probably, to say that's really not where I'm supposed to be, and my passions are over here, and I think I can add value from both the recruiter side as well as the corporate side, and like every step that you took and every experience that you had really led you to where you are today.
Yeah, and I sort of lost your question in my answer there, but I think that the thing I love about how I've set up my business is I designed my life, my career, to take advantage of the work I love the most. I love recruiting. I love getting to know candidates and understanding their career goals, and then helping match them to my clients. And I love working with my clients who are trying to figure out what they really need when they're hiring. And we have some great processes to help them figure that out, so they're making really good choices. I always say my job is to make sure the client gets the very best candidates and all the information they need to make the best hiring decision, but also that my candidates get all the information they need to make a good career decision. That is where my career coaching brain, I think, kicks in. So a lot of recruiters don't have that same kind of penchant for both that I have. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with a candidate that I didn't at the end say, do you mind if I take off my recruiter hat and put on my coaching hat and talk to you a little bit about how you're telling your story? because it's really, I'm also very passionate about helping people manage their careers well.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so you get really pumped up as the recruiter to, really help them for the long game. And then the other thing that I hear you saying, and that I find really fascinating, is you've developed this process. So, companies will have job descriptions out there, but at the end of the day, and I know there's a cultural element. There's a fit element. There's a, what's going on in the company, whether it's going through massive transformation, the type of skills, do they want the person to be a real change agent? And so you're probably able to vet all that out through your process. And then you also, because you've spent time with the candidates and you've got this database of candidates that you've coached and mentored and met with and heard their stories and helped them craft their stories, you're able to say, aha, this person would be a good match. So you're like the matchmaker?
I have to correct one thing on that. I don't coach and mentor candidates. I mean, I might give them some advice, but they have to be themselves. My clients want to make sure that they're getting authentic candidates, who they are. Now, if you are, if you've hired me to be your career coach, that is a different role than a recruiter role.
Okay. And so that's just another service that you have.
I keep that pretty separate. I mean, I definitely guide people when they're just not telling their story well. I'll make suggestions on how they could rethink how they're telling their story, but I don't put words in their mouth. That's right. They got to do that. But I think that our process is one that I really love. We're not the only ones that use it, but we really begin with the business goals in mind. And when you think about it as a communications leader, when you're creating a communication strategy, where do you begin? What is the business trying to achieve? That's exactly where we begin when we're recruiting. And then we take a step back and we say, okay, how is this person going to help you achieve that? And that's where we really get into the heart of what is this person going to do? It's not what do they have? Oh, they have 10 years experience. They have a bachelor's degree or an MBA. Those are great things, but that doesn't tell you if they can do those things that the business needs to have done. And then we take another step back and say, okay, what personality characteristics are required to do it well here? And then we look back one more step and say, what team, tools, and resources are in place so that this person can hit the ground running? All that takes a lot of information gathering from the client, but what that does is give us a blueprint to go find a person that can do that in that organization. It's pretty fun. I love it.
That's great. That's great. And so the other thing I was thinking is, for you to come up with this concept of the process of and the tools that you're using as the recruiter on behalf of the organization, I still go back to your Army and Navy experience. And I still go back to, being very process oriented, being very outcomes driven, some of those teachings and principles that the military kind of embeds in you. Do you feel like that kind of is where that came from, or is it just you in your career training?
I'm going to say maybe. I think it probably is my personality type. But if you were to talk to my hardcore military friends, they would tell you that I was not your typical military chick. I mean, I would get teased a lot to say that I wasn't in the real Army or the real Navy because I was public affairs. I was running around with a camera and jumping on helicopters with the generals, or, hanging out with the admiral, because you're the communications person, right? And
Right.
it's not the same job. It's a different job, and I had a lot of exposure and a lot of opportunity to do things that, really cool I had really cool assignments, but I wouldn't call myself typical military or even disciplined.
Okay. Well, that's fair enough. What would you say was your coolest military assignment that you can talk about?
Yeah, luckily I wasn't top secret clearance because I'm a talker, so that would never have worked out. But I had several, but a couple of real highlights in my last years in the Navy were I was able to take a team down to Nicaragua for a medical readiness exercise, where it was a bunch of doctors and nurses, and we went into the rural villages and provided medical services to them. And my team took photos and wrote articles, and we got several of them published both in Navy publications as well as some outside military publications, which were really cool. And then the other assignment was right after September 11th. I got recalled to active duty and was given 4 days notice to leave my life for a year. And luckily, I got sent to Gaeta, Italy, which is where the Sixth Fleet was headquarters at the time. And there I was able to help the organization build an internal communications program for the family members, because when September 11th happened, ships went out to sea and the family members were living in town and had no information. And
Wow.
their sailors were at sea and the base was locked down. And people didn't live on the base in this particular location because it was just a small support base. And so they realized that they really did need a system and process to be able to communicate with those family members quickly and securely. And so I created a cadence of ways to communicate regularly so that family members knew where and how to get information at any time. And then if an emergency happened, there was a process in place for them to get information quickly. And we used all of the typical internal communications techniques like town halls and newsletters and messaging. And this was before social media. So
Right.
Lots of different things that we could do. And it ended up being a really great program. And I actually was able to create a manpower case study for them to put a person in the job to maintain that program so that it stayed. And it did until they relocated the base to Naples.
Wow. What a great experience, and what a great legacy to leave, right? In a time of crisis, that these people are, really getting the information that they so desperately need.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another question. So in our pre-show banter, you mentioned that at one point you worked for a cruise ship, on a cruise ship. Like, tell me more, because I have never met anybody that has worked on a cruise ship or for a cruise ship.
Okay, so none of my stories are ever short. I have to go back and tell you this little history. When I was 14 years old, my parents took me to the Virgin Islands. And as a girl from Iowa, that was the first time I saw an ocean. And it was the first time I saw a cruise ship in the port. And I again, am old enough to say there weren't as many as there are now. And I went home from that vacation, went to the Cedar Falls Public Library, and literally researched every cruise ship. Wrote to them and said, I am 14 years old. What kind of jobs are on ships and how do I get one? And none of them answered me. Fast forward, I was in journalism school at University of Missouri, and there was a bulletin on the career services office at the J School saying that there was a job for a writer-editor on board this cruise line. But I was only a sophomore, but I remembered it. And when I was a senior, I wrote to them and just said, hey, if you're ever looking for an editor, I exist. But I didn't hear from them again. Took the job with Dow Chemical. 3 weeks before graduation, the cruise line calls me and says they want me to start, but I had to start 3 weeks before graduation. So I said no. And then 4 years later, I called the career services office because I was really unhappy in my job. And I said, I just need a job where I can travel. And 2 days after that, the career services office called me and said, Angee, remember that job you turned down? That cruise line is looking for an editor. And within a week, I had a job offer. I packed up everything I owned, sold my car, and I went to work on the Royal Viking Sun and sailed around the world for 3 years as a writer-editor.
How interesting.
It was a blast. It was a great.
And you were young. You were
I was
younger.
in my 20s. Yeah, I was in my 20s. Great job in your 20s.
Definitely. What was your favorite call of port or country that you went to? Or I'm sure there was a lot.
Oh, yeah. I love everywhere I am for different reasons, but I think my happy place is anywhere in the Mediterranean.
Mm.
I like the food. I like the wine. I like the people. I like the vibe. I like the pace. I like it all.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, were there other pivot points in your life that, so we've talked about journalism, we've talked about cruise ships, we've talked about the military, we talked about being a recruiter. So you've had quite a career.
Yes, I'm very lucky.
Quite a career. And you're now at the point in your life that you've been in business for 10 years, I think you said?
Yep, October will be my 10-year anniversary for Linsey Careers.
That's fantastic.
Longest I've ever held a job.
Hey, but you know what? You got a great boss, right?
I love my boss.
Right. And you've got this freedom-based business. So one of the other things that you and I had talked about is as you put your work out there into the world, your body of work, you're going to start to offer these Dare to Be Deliberate workshops. And so tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you for asking. I'm so excited about these workshops. Last year, I decided to write a book, and I interviewed several heads of communications about their career journeys, things they did right, wrong, advice they give, advice they get, things like that. My book is in editor stage right now, I'm happy to say, but that exercise really gave me the idea for these workshops, because every day I'm talking to candidates and they sort of are 10 to 15 years into their careers, and they look up and they're like, whoa, I've been so busy managing my job, I forgot to manage my career. They aren't paying attention to nurturing their networks. They're not really using their mentor relationships the way they could or should. They aren't having the right career conversations with their boss so that their boss can champion them to move in the direction that they want to go. And I thought, you know what? There's real opportunity here to create a workshop that helps people be deliberate in how they manage their career. And so I created this 2-day, it's a little bit less than 2 days, but 2-day session. We do everything from creating a career vision to learning how to tell our own story, because communicators are great at telling everybody else's story and not necessarily their own. Some really good tactical tools for having career conversations with your networks, with your mentors, creating your own personal board of directors, having career conversations with your boss. And we're going to have a panel of executives talking about their career journeys and a Q&A forum. And then we're going to create an action plan. What do you need to do weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, just to be steady and be deliberate in your career? So, because our career paths are never one ladder up. They are winding roads. They take exits. You have your priorities shift. You may have children, aging parents, health issues, or maybe you just take a sabbatical. Whatever. Then how do you get back on track? All of the stuff we're going to learn in this workshop, you can reuse over and over again, depending on where your priorities are.
Right. And I think you said you're going to offer it in a couple different cities, right?
Yeah, we're doing it in 4 cities this year. The first one's in May in Seattle. Then it will be July in Chicago, September in Washington, D.C., and October in San Francisco. We're limiting it to only 20 people per workshop on purpose because the network is going to be powerful. We're also limiting it to people who are kind of mid to senior level, senior manager, director level, so that they're a room of peers, and that they will be able to catapult each other throughout the years ahead.
Yeah, I think that's great that you're creating that community and you're providing the tools and the resources nationally, really, these days with people moving and I always like to say careers are like jungle gyms. Like, when I first started working, it was more climb the ladder, right? But that's not how it is. And that's not how it's been over the last 15 or 20 years. It's much more like a jungle gym. And, do you take a break? Maybe you get sick. Maybe you take care of a parent. Maybe you take care of a child. People don't stay with organizations 40 years and get the gold watch. Like, that just doesn't happen. At the same time, job hopping doesn't have the stigma that it used to have. At least that's my perception. I don't know what you think about that.
It depends on what you mean by job hopping. I think people that change jobs every 12, 18 months, that can be a problem. But you can have a blip of one of those, but you really don't want to have too many of them. I like to see people, especially as they get more mature in their career, I like to see 3 and 5 year stints at least a couple of times, because, when you think about it, you and I both know the first year you're figuring it out. The second year you're actually doing it right. The third year you're making changes so that it's better. And so
Correct.
And then you get promoted and you're starting over again. First year you're figuring out your new job.
Correct.
So
Correct. Yeah. So, and as you're talking to these employers, is there anything that you're seeing in terms that's maybe changed over the last 5 years in terms of what they're looking for these days?
Well, I do think that the lines between marketing and communications are blurrier. That's for sure. I also think that they are looking for some stability, that, they're investing a lot of money to bring a new person on, and they want to see that depth. The thing that I think happens when someone changes jobs every couple of years, they might get the same experience 10 times instead of having 10 years deep of experience, because, again, for that reason that we just talked about. And so I know employers really, I actually have heard many hiring leaders tell me they don't want somebody who's only had one experience, like they've been at a company for 20 years. And for those people who've done that, don't be afraid. It doesn't mean it's a deal breaker, because you've held lots of jobs within that 20 years. But they want to make sure someone has been exposed to new ideas. And so that's the thing you want to be able to talk about. And if you have been in an organization 20 years, hopefully you've been exposed to new ideas because you've had leaders coming from outside, right?
Right. Yeah, I know for me, one of the things that I know that some of the people that have hired me have said is that I had I had public relations or marketing experience, but across different verticals.
Right.
So I knew this industry, that industry, and that industry, and that's where diversity of thought and new ideas came from, because of how those, whether it was a regulated entity or it was owned by a venture capitalist, or, it was, their customer base was global or whatever, or they were innovating and bringing new products to market or things of that nature. So I know that's one of the things I tell people is, don't just stay in one industry and switch companies,
right,
as your career strategy.
Yeah. And it so depends. Like, I always hate to say, I always hate to make any hard and fast rules, because people want to hang on to that, and everything depends. Sometimes I'll have a hiring leader that really wants somebody with the same industry experience, and that's it. And so that's what I go look for. And then I'll go to another company and they will think more like the people who've hired you and say, no, we want that diversity. Great. And, the thing about the 20 years, somebody might say, no, I love that candidate. That's fantastic. And another person will say, no, I'm not going to do that. So there's no hard and fast rules. Everything depends. But I think what really is consistent is how you, the candidate, is clear about what the direction you want your career to go, and can really articulate where you've been and what you are capable of doing, how you can help that organization.
Yeah, and I think that's where the things that you talked about in your Dare to Be Deliberate workshop are going to be so helpful. Because you might have it in your head, but when you go through a workshop like you're offering, people are going to have that really buttoned up because you're going to step them through that.
And it's not just for changing jobs. It's for talking to your boss, because your boss may have an idea of the direction your career should go, and it might not be the same idea that you have for the direction you want your career to go. So the onus is on you to have a good career conversation so that your boss can help you get those assignments and get the experience to help you go in the direction you're trying to go.
Right. Well, I think that's fantastic that you've got 4 sessions. They're across the country, so people can get to whatever location. So how would people be able to find out information about those workshops?
So if you go to linseycareers.com/workshop, then you will be able to get the information on it. And I just ask you to click on a little apply here. I know it's an extra step, but we do that on purpose because I want to be able to talk to people, because it is an intimate group of just 20 people per. I want to make sure that we're going to be able to meet the expectations of anyone signing up, and that it's a good match.
Okay, and we'll make sure that we put that in the show notes, the link to that. So our finale question is, what is the bravest thing you've ever done?
I don't think I use the word brave for myself, because I do a lot of things that people think, wow, I can't believe you just did that. But I'm going to say quitting my perfectly good job and starting my business was probably the bravest thing I ever did. And I have no regrets.
That's fantastic. That really is. That really is. And I think, you were confident in your ability to survive, and you knew that you were trained up and you were ready to step into that opportunity. And so I think your track record speaks for itself. And I think, you're going to be able to have a very successful continue on your journey in doing the things that you love, right? And you're putting your work out in there in the world, and you're able to affect change, right? And you're like this matchmaker with all the right blend of skills that have gotten you here.
Thank you.
So, well, I really appreciate you being on the show tonight, and I really appreciate you for I feel like we're kindred spirits in a lot of ways. And I feel like, through our podcast, we're trying to get the word out, spread the word, get different people connected to different ideas, different people. And I love that you called your workshop Dare to Be Deliberate, because I think that's exactly what people need to do. They do need to dare to be deliberate and intentional. So I'm just so grateful that we connected in San Francisco, and that we reconnected, and that we continue to connect. And so, again, I just thank you so much. And we'll put a lot of this content in the show notes so that our listeners can find you online, find your services online, connect with you, get on your list, find out about your workshops, find about your job opportunities that you're, searching for them. And maybe they'll come into your world that way. So I just really want to thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M., where we talked to Angee Linsey about why you need to be deliberate and intentional in planning your career. You can learn more about Angee's Dare to Be Deliberate workshops at linseycareers.com/workshop. And if you'd like to connect with me, go to tracym.com. I'd love to hear feedback from you about this episode. And if you would like to leave a review, that would be excellent. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm Tracy M. And I'd love to have you in my community.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M. and hope that you enjoyed the show. For more information about today's episode, as well as additional free resources to help you achieve greatness in your life, visit tracym.com and sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, dream big, believe in yourself, and let your brilliance shine as only you can do.